Hi there. If you're new here, then my name's Shan, and I work in a large biopharma company, and I've been working in pharma and biotech for nearly 10 years. Before that, I was actually working in a medical communications agency. So I've been working in and around pharma for nearly 20 years now. And I like to spend my time helping people either who've graduated from biosciences, medicine, pharmacy, or nursing to find a job within the industry, or perhaps those people like me who pivoted from another industry and now want to move into a biopharma or biotech company. So that's what I do. Today's episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about, say you've graduated with a bioscience degree or maybe a medical degree or a pharmacy degree, and you don't really want to practice or you don't want to go into the lab. So you're looking for how to enter into industry. Got a really good book on this that's actually really good value for money. It's $6 or £5. So you can find a link to that on my website. I'll drop the link in the description below. But essentially, I'm just going to quickly talk you through some of the entry-level roles, how to break into industry if you've just graduated, and also some hints and tips for the best types of companies to go to so that you can get a really strong foundation in your career. So let's get down to it. So what am I talking about when I say biopharma or biotech company? So there are large biopharma companies. So companies like Roche, Novartis, GSK, Amgen, Pfizer, they're large corporate companies, and they usually make things like antibodies or small molecule kind of therapeutics. And they may have several therapeutics across multiple disease areas. And then you have the smaller biotech companies. They tend to have one or two or maybe a handful of products in development. As the name biotech would suggest, they tend to make biologics. So things like vaccines, antibodies, maybe having between 50 staff to 10,000 staff, whereas the biopharma companies might have upwards of 50,000 employees across the globe. So there's a big difference in the types of companies. Now I'll talk you through some of the entry-level roles and how to get into those companies, and then we can look at the pros and cons of those types of companies. So the types of roles you're going to be looking for if you're coming out of just finishing your degree, departments and roles that I think are really good entry-level roles. So one of those is working in medical affairs or medical adjacent roles. So things like, especially if you've got a medical degree or a pharmacy or nursing, so more of a clinical degree, then you might be able to find an entry level into medical affairs, either through an internship or young leader program. Many companies do these programs. If you buy my guide, then there's a link to all of the companies that have these programs. There's also roles like medical information officer are really good entry-level roles. And although depending on the company, they're not necessarily sitting in medical affairs, it's quite easy to be able to transfer over to medical affairs within a couple of years. You can also find clinical internships, regulatory affairs, other roles that may be easier to get into as well, especially from academia. So if you've done like a PhD or taught masters, or if you've written your own papers, then you might be able to get a role as a kind of associate publications manager or something like that. That role includes overseeing the publications planning, the strategy, and the execution of the individual publications. And part of the role is also upholding, making sure that everyone's following the right processes, not just internally, but externally. So following some of the external guidelines like GPP4 and JE criteria for authorship and things like that. If you're more strategically or creative, then you might want to consider moving into a commercial role. So you might be able to find a junior product manager and either within a biopharma company or maybe even a med tech company. When I say med tech companies, I mean the companies that make devices and tools around the diagnosis and management of patients. So those companies include companies like Medtronic, Boston Scientific, and Philips Healthcare as well. They would be considered medtech companies. And the product manager within medtech tends to be focused not just on the kind of commercialization of the product, but they may also be involved in the clinical testing of that product. So it's a nice one because it's quite clinical, but also very commercially focused as well and a bit more creative. So I think there's lots of really good entry level options available to people who have a bioscience or more of a clinical degree or a PhD. I think there's some really fantastic options in industry. And I think what's great about industry as well is the salaries, even for internships, can be really competitive. And it's not just the salaries that are great, but there are also lots of perks. Sometimes you get perks within the office. Sometimes you get share options, you get good bonuses. So I think industry is a really good option to really enhance the trajectory of your career. So is that in terms of some of the types of companies and some of the types of roles that you could consider if you're coming straight out of university. But maybe we should get into perhaps what types of companies might actually be the best for starting out in your career and give you a really solid foundation with the skills. So when people say to me, what's it like working in a big company versus a small company? Now, I have to admit that I've worked in small clinical research organizations, which are different to biotech companies. But one thing I will say is I think they share quite a lot of similarities in that they don't tend to have that corporate structure. It's very much small teams, very agile, able to make big decisions. But then often the decisions are down to one person versus in a big corporate structure where the decisions seem to be made more by committee holder. So I think there are advantages and disadvantages. But one thing I will say is if you're starting out your career, and you want to have that kind of solid foundation so that you can really feel confident that, for example, you're a competent medical affairs director or you're a confident publications manager, then I personally think it makes the most sense to work in a big biopharma company. And the reason I say that is because they have full training programs. You can get mentorship programs. You get all the training. Sometimes they even will train you up on a disease area and you'll do a week training course. You get all that really good training and foundation that I don't think is going to be readily available in a small biotech company because it's very agile. They don't have the time and resources that these large biopharma companies have. So personally, I think it makes sense to start like the first, say, at least couple of years in a big biopharma company and then move into a small biotech company. These are some of the tips for how to break into industry. Like and subscribe if you like this content and want to hear more, and see you soon.